Hey guys, today's story is going to be a sequel to the pony story I did a few days ago. I'll leave links to that one in the cards in the top right and in the description, but without further ado, let's get into it. Hello. You may remember me. A few days ago I posted a story about the tragically short life of Snake Eyes the pony, and all of y'all seemed to really get a kick out of my brother as a DM, and as a person. So I have yet another story about him to share with you today. Now, as some of you have kindly pointed out, while my brother may be a big jerk about the rules, a lot of the time, that isn't really the source of his issues as a DM, so much more is his aggressive need for total control. So, I do apologize to all the rule lovers out there. I never meant to imply that following the rules was a bad thing. It's always about being a jerk. So my brother hates flavorful character backgrounds, and thinks they're a waste of time. And before you ask, I don't know what's happened to him in his life that made him fly into a rage at the thought of people having fun. But that's how he is. My brother is Chekhov's gunslinger, because you don't include anything in D&D if it's not going to serve a functional purpose. And he said,
I find it really annoying when players want to make special characters with fancy backstories. It's way more respectable and interesting if your character is just a normal guy on an adventure.
In his eyes, he's doing you a favor by DMing for you, and you have to understand that it's his story that you have the privilege to participate in, and the players do not get to tell him what the story is about. The characters are just in his story for you to interact with the world. That's all. If you handed my brother a multi-paged backstory, he would look you in the eyes as he threw it in the trash. So the story today is 50% about his hatred of writing characters creatively, and 50% about his massive control issues. So, on to the story. This takes place about a year or two after Snake Eyes the pony was laid to rest. So, around this time, I was about 13 years old, and my brother, being 22-ish, was home visiting from college, and I asked him to play D&D, since my dad was only DMing for me once a year. My brother said sure, and I was so happy to play that I didn't consider that, of course, there was going to be a catch. I called my cousin and step-uncle, a different one from the first story, to come over and play D&D. And while we were waiting for them to show up, my brother said that it was a good time to make characters. Personally, character creation is one of my favorite parts of D&D, and I felt this way back then too, so I was excited, and I was going to play another bard, because I always play bards, and he knows this. So I started saying,
Alright, I'll play a half-elf bard.
But he cut me off and said,
What makes you think you get to decide?
I stammered at this because I was totally confused. I thought the whole point of D&D was making your own character, and he told me that character creation took too long, so he would be writing our characters for us. And I asked him if he could at least write the character that I wanted to play, because it would still take the same amount of time. And he said, absolutely not. So he started rolling dice and saying that he was going to make me play a guy character, and probably a dwarf paladin or something. Now, at the time, I was a young girl right on the cusp of puberty, and in middle school, and extremely insecure about my perceived femininity, because I was a little overweight back then. And D&D was a huge escape for me at the time, to play the pretty girls that I wish I could be, so I did not want to play a guy, especially not a dwarf, and so I started panicking at this. And after a bit of an anxious meltdown of me begging my brother to not make me a guy, and especially a dwarf, and to please let me play a bard, as I didn't want to associate myself with the masculinity of a tank class character either, and I even told him why I was upset, because I had very low self-esteem about how people saw me. He just argued that dwarves were awesome, and I should feel honored to play one. By the time my cousin and step-uncle showed up, my brother sighed and I thought he was going to cut me some slack. But then he said,
Class, race, or sex. I'll only let you pick one.
And before I could comment, he followed it up with,
Or we could just not play. You want to play, right?
Understanding my power in the situation, and not wanting to make a scene in front of my cousin and step-uncle, I told my brother that I, at least, wanted to be a girl, because that was probably the most important to me, and I knew he would make me play a guy if I didn't pick it. So, my brother continued to roll dice and write my entire character for me right in front of my eyes. No input from me at all. My cousin and step-uncle weren't nearly as bothered by having their characters wrote for them, and eventually it was time to start the game, and my brother distributed our character sheets and described our characters and their backgrounds to us. And, no surprise, my brother handed me a dwarf fighter, but he did me a favor because at least she was a girl. And he didn't waste time to describe the impressively thick beard she had. I was holding back tears. But what really did it for me was when he turned to my step-uncle and said,
"So you're playing a half-elf bard?"
I almost had a breakdown at this, and looking back, I should have left right then and there. But I was still an insecure 13-year-old girl who was so D&D starved that I was desperate to just play, even if it meant that I had to put up with playing a buff and ugly dwarf woman while my step-uncle across the table got to play the character of my dreams. And I don't know how I managed to do it without bursting into tears. Well, guys, I can say without any kind of doubt that the brother did this entirely out of spite. It really seemed like this guy was incredibly petty or controlling or just wanted to screw with his sister in the previous story, but this guy is pretty crappy as a person, let alone a DM. But in any case, guys, that's the end of the story. And if you liked it and if you enjoyed it and would like to listen to more, make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for future videos. And make sure that you let me know what you think of this guy in the comments. But, as always, have a good one.